Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for attending. So one request, if you're not speaking, keep yourself on mute, and we will take questions following the comments by Mothers for Peace and the nuclear experts and environmentalists. So ahead of tonight's Nuclear Regulatory Commission meeting at 6 p.m. in San Luis Obispo and online, which we can put the link in the chat, where they're going to receive public comment on the Diablo post-shutdown decommissioning activities report, and that includes some cost estimates, irradiated fuel management plan, and other things. So while the NRC is pushing ahead with this decommissioning process, Governor Newsom, the Department of Energy, now the California Legislature with the passage of AB 205, they're really lining up things to keep the plant operating past 2025. So today, Mothers for Peace, along with nuclear experts, are going to address sort of this cognitive dissonance being played out at the expense of the agreement that was put in place in 2018 to close the plant by 2025, safety upgrades, seismic upgrades, license and permit renewals, nuclear waste, and the like. We're going to kick off the event with Sam Blakeslee, former state senator representing San Luis Obispo, and he'll begin. Sam, if you can take yourself off mute, I think you have, we can get started. That'd be great. Thank you so much.
Great. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with everyone, and I'll just briefly share again or reiterate that my involvement in this issue relates to me being a longtime resident of San Luis Obispo County, representing this community in the State Assembly and the State Senate, and serving on the Seismic Safety Commission, the California Seismic Safety Commission, as the legislator's representative when I was serving in office. And lastly, the author of AB 1632, which was signed by Governor Schwarzenegger to initiate new seismic studies to assess the risk around the nuclear power plant here in the community. The history of the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant is well known. It was licensed and designed and licensed before the existence of the Hosgri fault was known, which is a fault system very much like the San Andreas fault, a right lateral slip fault, only a couple 3 miles offshore. And the discovery of that fault before the plant began operations forced the NRC into a process to reevaluate the seismic risk, because the facility had largely been approved, assuming a dramatically smaller seismic risks, because the utility had claimed there were no earthquake faults close to the facility. As a result, a standard was established for Diablo, known as the Hosgri evaluation exception. And this Hosgri evaluation exception went through a less rigorous analysis, but it established a benchmark for what would be allowed on the Hosgri if there were an earthquake. Since the legislation I mentioned, seismic studies were performed pursuant to AB 1632, which identified 3 new faults, and those 3 faults were in very close proximity to the nuclear power plant. And if the Hosgri exception, the evaluation exception, could be defined as predicting shaking at this level, shaking on the new earthquakes in each of the 3 instances produced shaking higher than the predictions on the Hosgri, which already was an exception to the safe shutdown earthquake the NRC had previously approved. So PG&E found itself in a dilemma, because all of these new faults, which they claimed did not exist, could be shown to produce shaking significantly greater than that produced by the Hosgri, which is already above the safe shutdown level that the NRC initially approved. PG&E then mobilized its technical teams and completely revamped the methodology whereby shaking is calculated from earthquakes, such that the Hosgri exception and the 3 new earthquakes which produced shaking above that level were determined to shift downward by almost 50% in their potential shaking. So with sharpening of the pencil and defining new methodologies, largely by in-house staff at PG&E, they were then able to claim that the plant was safe. Now, what's troubling is this new methodology is a statistical one, and the statistics used in the database to arrive at this conclusion include less than 99% of the earthquakes that are used in that statistical analysis have no bearing to a location like Diablo, because the faults used in the statistical analysis were much further away. And what we know is that in the near field, when you're within 600 meters of a fault, which is the situation with the shoreline, those statistical methods that rely upon earthquakes that are much further away break down. And we also know that at the Parkfield site, we did instrument an earthquake fault, the San Andreas, densely with seismometers in the near field. And what we found is virtually all the long distance relationships that are typically used break down. And with a much smaller earthquake, a magnitude 6 at Parkfield, we saw accelerations in excess of 2.5 G, something that the new methodologies would state could not occur. So I bring these issues up as a seismologist, as a resident, as a policymaker, to point out that notwithstanding the assurances by the utility, the methodologies employed to then make the technical claim the plant is safe can and should be seriously and rigorously challenged. And given PG&E's long history with similar regulatory issues on gas pipeline issues, on electric transmission issues, on causes of fires around the state, and also by looking at the problem of regulatory capture in Japan, where we saw the Fukushima problem with its regulators, it's critically important that the residents of this community, and I would say the press, maintain a level of skepticism and not accepting these representations at face value. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Sam. So transitioning now to Linda Seeley, she is a Mothers for Peace spokesperson. She's going to sort of pick it up on safety regarding upgrades and deferred maintenance on the one-through cooling system and sort of their perspective on the current events. Thanks, Linda. I think you're on mute.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm glad to be here today. Thank you. The people in our community have been looking forward to the safe shutdown of Diablo Canyon for the past 6 years. And now we're told that all the hard work in preparation for the shutdown may be thrown out into the wind. But we're not going to accept this. We already have 3 million pounds, over 3 million pounds of highly radioactive nuclear waste sitting on an earthquake-prone coastline, and we don't want more. And the once-through cooling system at Diablo Canyon has been defined as the greatest predator of marine life in the state of California, and we want that killing to stop. And the NRC has said that of the 93 reactors that are still operating in the US, the 2 at Diablo Canyon are at the top of the NRC's list as being the most likely to experience an earthquake larger than they're designed to withstand, echoing what Sam just said. The utter devastation to our economy, our food system, and to our public health if, God forbid, Diablo Canyon would have a serious accident and the critical backup safety systems were to malfunction. It's just not worth the risk of that would be involved. And we have lots of questions for the NRC tonight, starting off with, how can the NRC allow for continued operation without a timely renewal for extension of the license from PG&E, number one. Number two, how long is PG&E proposing to keep the plant open? Is it for 3 years? Is it for 20 years? Nobody's saying that right now. What is the plan? And there's a big difference between keeping it open for 3 years and 20 years, as you all know. And what's going to be done with the ratepayer money that's already been spent on decommissioning plans, and all the money that was given to the county and to the cities in mitigation, and all the retention money paid to the employees. Another one is they've had a big exit of workers at Diablo Canyon. Institutional knowledge is being lost. How are they going to get adequately trained workers? Is the Unit 1 reactor vessel going to be checked for embrittlement? It is designated by the NRC as the second most embrittled reactor vessel in the whole fleet. How are they going to store the extra radioactive waste that is that would be generated if they're allowed to go on? And are they going to build cooling towers at Diablo Canyon? If so, they'll cost more than, I think the low estimate was 4 billion, the high estimate was 12 billion. Well, and will the seismic studies resume? The people of our county are living in a state, as Leana said, of cognitive dissonance. It is very disturbing to us. The NRC meeting tonight is called the Post-Shutdown Decommissioning Activities Report. And PG&E is doing really well at planning for shutdown. And they're also applying for a license to keep it going. I think PG&E should refrain from applying for that license and keep its promise to the people of the Central Coast to shut down the plant. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. So Friends of the Earth was one of the signers on the agreement, and we have the president of Friends of the Earth, Erich Pica, here today. Thank you, Erich, for joining us. I know everyone's very busy. So Erich's going to talk a little bit about what that agreement sort of means and the repercussions if the Diablo were to continue operating past that agreement's decision of 2025. Thank you, Erich.
Thank you. And good morning once again. My name is Erich Pica, and I'm president of Friends of the Earth. Friends of the Earth is a national environmental advocacy organization with more than 3 members and supporters across the United States. And I guess more importantly for this conversation, Friends of the Earth is one of the lead groups that negotiated the first of its kind joint proposal. And it should be noted that this joint proposal extended the life of Diablo Canyon, and it also provided an orderly pathway to replace Diablo Canyon's power with greenhouse gas-free power, as well as provided resources for the workers and communities around Diablo Canyon. And so when I look at the joint proposal from 2016, I think of the moment that we're in is that we're in kind of a key leadership and integrity moment for Governor Newsom on the question of Diablo Canyon. In 2016, Governor Newsom, then the lieutenant governor, was presented with a unique proposal while he was sitting on the Public Lands Commission that satisfied PG&E's desire to extend their land lease till 2025. The environmental community got a commitment to cease operations in 2025 once PG&E withdrew their license from the NRC, and the state got an orderly closure of Diablo Canyon with a mandate for replacement power. This agreement was adopted by the state legislature, was adopted by the Public Utility Commission, and it all started with then Lieutenant Governor's one of the 3 votes on the Public Lands Commission. And the parties to this joint agreement, we all gave pieces and worked on this agreement as a binding agreement between the parties to ensure we had an orderly closure of Diablo Canyon. Now, 6 years later, the state is now debating whether to extend Diablo Canyon because of a lack of leadership by the Public Utility Commission and now Governor Newsom to follow the joint proposal and procure the replacement resources that we all knew needed replacing. There was a reason why Friends of the Earth signed on to this agreement, because we knew Diablo Canyon was a big part of the California grid and it needed to be replaced in an orderly way. The Public Utility Commission knew that. And even PG&E knew this at the time, that Diablo Canyon was incompatible with where the California energy grid was going, with more distributed renewable energy, more energy efficiency, battery storage. And so this is where we need to talk about integrity. There is still time for Governor Newsom to lead this conversation with integrity. Diablo Canyon is not scheduled for closure until 2024 and 2025. This means we have time. We have 2 years before the first reactor needs to shut down and 3 years before the second. Leading with integrity at this moment would be to stay committed to the joint proposal and use the power of the governorship to push for the necessary investments and expedited approval for the procurement of battery storage, energy efficient, renewable energy that were a part of the agreement, part of the PUC proceedings. This is where the governor should be putting his leadership, and he should be leading with integrity. We have 3 years to deploy these resources and these investments. We gave the PUC and the state with this joint agreement starting in 2016, we gave them a total almost 10 years to do so. Now it's time to use all the money they're contemplating about keeping Diablo Canyon running, pour that money into the joint proposal, fully implement it, and fully bring on the resources that allows the governor and the state and all the parties to move into the future in 2025 with leadership and integrity, because we created this agreement, we knew what we were getting into, and we had the solutions for the state to move forward. And so this is really a time about leadership, and it is a time about integrity for Governor Newsom when it comes to the choices we have before us. The same issues that led to the joint agreement that were there in 2016 are here today. Diablo is incompatible with the grid. It's actually a really poor energy source to deal with all the peaking that's happening in the state right now. You can't ramp up a nuclear reactor to meet load requirements. We have the procurement resources to do so and the ability to invest. And we kept the communities whole throughout this entire process. I urge the governor, and I urge the state legislature, and I urge the Public Utility Commission that now is the time to lead with integrity and to take on the joint proposal. This was all anticipated in the proposal. We provided a plan that has been approved through the multiple legislative and administrative bodies. Let's stick to the plan and see the governor lead on deploying those resources that are necessary. Nuclear power is not the answer to the climate crisis. Keeping Diablo open is not the answer to California's energy needs. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Erich. That was great. So another signer to the agreement was the NRDC, and we have Ralph Cavanagh here, the Energy Program Co-Director, to sort of give their perspective, the NRDC's perspective on what's going on today that sort of Erich lined up for him. And I think it's a perfect segue. Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you, and thank you to Mothers for Peace for organizing this forum. Erich has summarized the history of the joint proposal to retire and replace Diablo Canyon, which we helped negotiate with him in the first half of 2016. PG&E was also vitally involved, as he's pointed out, and the plant's workers, the IBEW, along with the communities, number of other environmental groups. I want to focus on the arguments that the proponents of a further life extension are making as to why conditions have changed and the joint proposal should no longer be followed and honored. And I agree with Erich strongly that it should be, and that the basis on which it was constructed remains even stronger today. But there are essentially two arguments. The first is that California's commitment to decarbonization is even stronger now than it was then, and Diablo Canyon as a zero carbon resource is critical to meeting California's ambitious targets. And the second is that climate change has created unique reliability problems on the grid that only Diablo Canyon or Diablo Canyon in concert with other resources can solve. Those are the two arguments. It's important to emphasize that both were fully considered when the joint proposal was negotiated, and both are still excellent reasons why Diablo Canyon will no longer fit as a cost-effective solution after 2025. On decarbonization, California's 5 major utilities all have published plans for how they're going to decarbonize their systems and how they're going to help the state eliminate carbon emissions across the entire economy. All 5 of our major electric utilities. The most recent, with the most ambitious plan, was PG&E itself a month ago. Not one of those plans, not one, recommends or assumes or anticipates a further life extension for Diablo Canyon. That should tell you something. The people who know the most about the needs of the grid and about the needs of what it's going to take to eliminate carbon emissions have all issued plans that assume the retirement and replacement of Diablo Canyon on the schedule recommended in the joint proposal. Well, what about reliability? What about extreme weather conditions threatening the integrity of the grid? I know that all of the speakers today unite in the view that reliability is critical to a successful clean energy transition. But it is noteworthy that although the California Independent System Operator, the California PUC, the California Energy Commission are all scrambling to deal with the unique challenges of climate change, extreme heat, reduced hydropower, they're looking for solutions. They've got a significant budget to do it. None of them have published an assessment saying that Diablo Canyon needs to be extended as a cost-effective part of that portfolio. And the reason they haven't is in part grounded in pure common sense. The reliability problems of California and the West are problems that affect a limited number of hours every year, very limited, fewer than 10%. Now, during those hours, it is critical to have enough power supply available to maintain the grid, but it's not a 24/7 problem. It's more a 1 in 10, a 1 in 20 hour problem. And the last thing you'd want to solve a problem like that is a giant machine that has to operate 24/7 in order to be economic, which is of course exactly what Diablo Canyon is. Diablo Canyon is not a reliability resource. Its rationale was grounded in a completely different system with completely different needs. And what the joint proposal said, and what is even clearer now, is that we need a different set of tools to address reliability associated with extreme climate change, led of course by energy efficiency, demand response, storage, renewables, all of the solutions that were beginning to emerge strongly in 2016 and have since emerged fully. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ralph, for expanding on that. So we're seeing a clear messaging here, and now we can kind of back that up with some hard facts about waste storage. And I've got Kevin Kamps here, a radioactive waste specialist from Beyond Nuclear. Welcome, Kevin. Thank you so much. I think.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. And you've heard many good reasons for sticking to the retirement plan at Diablo Canyon 2024-2025. A good reason is high-level radioactive waste. So for every year that Diablo Canyon continues to operate, that will mean another 40 metric tons both units are operating of level radioactive waste generation. So I reviewed the documents that PG&E will present tonight, the slideshow, and I just have some notes here to look at. So one of the false assumptions that PG&E makes is that in the year 2038, the US Department of Energy will begin to take spent nuclear fuel from Diablo Canyon away to a repository. This is a completely false assumption. The Department of Energy several years ago estimated the earliest repository could open is 2048. So PG&E is off by a decade. And every year that the waste is stuck at Diablo Canyon increase the costs. So the costs that are already very significant for managing spent nuclear fuel at Diablo Canyon will be increased by more remaining where it's at right now at the
Sorry,
site.
Kevin, you're
So,
breaking up a little bit. You're just breaking up a little bit. So just repeat your last sentence, please.
Okay, maybe a bad connection on my end. Yeah. A cost figure that PG&E shared in these documents that it will present tonight. The $1.3 billion spent nuclear fuel management cost under current plans, which is the shutdown plan. And as I mentioned, additional generation will increase those costs as well as delays longer storage at the site. Another significant change that PG&E mentions in its documents is that they are down on barge transportation. And this is a significant safety issue. So I know that there are issues with the narrow and winding road through Apple Beach, which would get wastes to the Pismo Beach rail yard. But this plan for barging, decommissioning wastes and high-level radioactive waste to the Wainimi in Oxnard needs a lot of examination. So just to give folks an idea, if one of these barges, high-level radioactive waste, were to sink in the Pacific Ocean, you have to wonder about the depths where the sinking takes place and compare it to the design criteria of nuclear regulatory to withstand an underwater immersion of a certain time duration at a certain depth. And I think those questions have not been answered. Significant risk of a sinking barge with high-level radioactive waste is if water enters the container, it can spark a chain reaction. There's enough fissile material in the container, uranium-235, plutonium-239, that a chain reaction could be sparked on the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, which would make emergency response a suicide mission as the container was brought to the surface, if that's even possible to do. But certainly the releases of radioactive contamination into the ocean would be worsened. So I would refer folks back to the Mothers for Peace press conference several weeks back, where I gave more details and more background information on the spent nuclear fuel concerns at Diablo. And the last risk I would like to point out is pool fire risk at Diablo. If generation of waste continues, that means continued pool storage, and the risks of, for one example, an earthquake hitting the site and sparking a fire in the storage pools at Diablo Canyon would be catastrophic beyond imagination. Just look at what happened at Fukushima Daiichi and what almost happened. The Unit 4 pool at Fukushima Daiichi in Japan almost caught fire in April of 2011. If that had happened, the prime minister serving at the time, Naoto Kan, had a contingency plan in place, which was secret until a year later, to evacuate 35 to 50 million people from northeastern Japan to escape pool fire consequences. So imagine the consequences in California if such a thing were to occur. Luckily, it did not happen in Japan, but we can't depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin. That was scary to hear all those facts, but we also have Jane Swanson from Mothers for Peace. She is a spokesperson, and she's going to really talk about sort of this feeling of betrayal that the community and Mothers for Peace is experiencing right now with all of these other plans and government entities trying to keep Diablo open past 2025. Thank you, Jane.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Yes, the central message Mothers for Peace will deliver at tonight's NRC meeting is that Diablo must shut down as planned in 2025. And the NRC must not waive any safety requirements to enable PG&E to back out of its commitment to permanently end operations at the end of current licenses. Mothers for Peace is outraged by the number of corporate and political figures betraying the public trust. PG&E, Governor Newsom, the Department of Energy, and even the San Luis Obispo County Board of Supervisors have all abandoned their responsibilities. 7 years ago, PG&E committed to shut down Diablo, stating that, this is a quote, as a result of the rapidly changing California energy landscape, Diablo Canyon will not be needed at the end of the license period, unquote. Erich Pica already made this statement, but this is in quotes from PG&E. So I love that quote. But now doing a complete flip-flop, PG&E has stated its intent to renege on its promise and to apply for federal monies to enable continued operations. Back in the day, Newsom urged PG&E to close Diablo, telling the New York Times that PG&E, another quote from the New York Times, has been caught red-handed over and over again, lying, manipulating, or misleading the public. They cannot be trusted, unquote. Clearly, Newsom can't be trusted either, as he is now leading the parade to keep Diablo open. Compounding the madness, the 3-member majority of the San Luis Obispo County Board of Supervisors sent a letter to Governor Newsom this past February, asking him to enable continued operations of Diablo. But that board is the lead agency for decommissioning. How can we trust the supervisors to conscientiously enforce state requirements for environmental cleanup when they have this attitude? It's appalling. And goodness knows we can't trust PG&E with its history of falsifying records, blowing up neighborhoods with faulty gas pipelines, and with its criminal convictions for burning down towns. So I encourage all of you, all members of the press and others that watch this later, I encourage you to explore our website at mothersforpeace.org, and you will see that we have been opposing the operation of Diablo Canyon for 50 years, using the limited legal paths available to citizen groups. We will continue that work until the devil in our backyard is gone. That concludes what I was wanting to say, because we need time for questions and answers.
Thank you, Jane. Yes, I was going to say, if you have a question, raise your hand and I can call on you. If there are any questions, comments, anything anyone would like to add, that would be great. We have still have time. It's a great opportunity to speak directly to these experts and people that have been engaged in this process for quite some time. Yes, Marty Brown.
Yes, if the Nuclear Regulatory Commission does grant them an extension, wouldn't seismic testing, which we outlawed last time they applied, wouldn't that be one of the methods that they would use to see about the the earthquake activity in the ocean, the Hosgri Fault? Wouldn't they be wanting to use that again? And wouldn't that still be unlawful?
I know that Sam had to leave. So Ralph, thank you.
Leana, I think, Marty, that is one in literally dozens of obstacles that are being overlooked by those who are acting as if it would be an almost effortless gesture to extend the operating life of Diablo Canyon. And let's recognize, PG&E knows that very well. I want to underscore a point that I think needs re-emphasis. PG&E has not yet filed for a life extension for this plant. My hope is, in large measure because of all of the strong points that have been raised at this press conference, that they won't do so. And I acknowledge the pain the community is going through because of all of this uncertainty. A lot of that is driven by proponents from outside California who saw this as an opportunity and have been rather relentlessly pursuing it, but they're now running up against some hard realities, and Marty's question frames one of them. There are many more. And it's part of my basis for confidence in saying, we're not going to do this. And that by the end of the year, it will be clear to everyone that what we really need to do is focus on reliability and decarbonization solutions that can work, which were at the basis, as Erich pointed out, of the original joint proposal to retire and replace Diablo Canyon.
Sorry, I pushed the video instead. Nick, thank you so much. Thank you, Ralph.
I'm not sure really who this goes to, who would be most knowledgeable, but can you run us through what is the gap between what California was hoping would be produced by renewables at this point and what actually has been produced? And what is the shortfall that the state is looking at because of this gap?
And Nick, I'll take an initial try at that and others should weigh in. It isn't so much that we are seeing a shortfall. The proponents of life extension aren't contending that renewables haven't delivered, although they are worried in some cases about supply chain problems that are delaying some of the storage and renewables. The real issue is the possibility that we'll need more than we thought during extreme weather conditions, because we're seeing heat events that people hadn't anticipated or experienced earlier. But it's important for me to emphasize, it's not like the people who were negotiating the joint proposal weren't aware of climate change, didn't anticipate increasing needs for the system, and haven't been active ever since in pointing out all the ways in which we can cope with the shortfalls that some are worried about. I'll lead my list of affordable, straightforward solutions with enhanced integration of the Western power grid, which is very much an ongoing work in progress, which is an effort to make sure that all of the Western states are working together to coordinate their clean energy agendas, and which is the most powerful short-term source of reliability solutions, unlike a giant 24/7 plant that has totally inflexible generation, which isn't a reliability solution at all.
Yeah, I could add a little bit to that. I'm not a scientist or an economist, but I have, and Mothers for Peace can come up with the sources. We understand that Diablo Canyon actually blocks the addition of renewable resources to the California energy supply. Again, Erich Pica did allude to this, because when it's running 24/7, but the independent system operators have a requirement that there be I think it's a 6% surplus of energy that they're aiming for. And when Diablo is overloading when we have more energy than we need, I'm not saying this well, when we need more energy than we need, the sun is shining, the wind is blowing, and everything's fine, then the independent system operators have to contact some of the renewable resources and say, quit feeding the grid, you're going to blow us up. And then California has to persuade or pay neighboring states to take some of our power because we have too much. So PG&E is just messing up the whole thing by taking away the flexibility that we need to ramp up and use our storage when needed, and to not overload the grid at times when extra power is not needed. I hope that makes some sense.
Linda, go ahead.
Also, we can look at this whole thing in a different way. California has a huge excess in its treasury right now. Gavin Newsom wants to use that money to keep all the power going in California. A much better solution to that problem, rather than paying for all the safety upgrades, all of the money that will have to be spent to keep Diablo Canyon operating, is they could subsidize, the state of California could subsidize rooftop solar for everybody in California, and they could subsidize battery backup storage for every home in California. And we could draw on that power there's only a 5-hour period during the height of summer, which is from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m., where we actually face problems with supply versus demand. And if those could be employed easily to jump over that hurdle, that they want to, and they want to keep this plant that is what was built. The reactor vessel for Unit 1 was built in 1967. It is a terrible threat to our community. Well, I won't go on, but anyway, that's a great way. I mean, I didn't make that up. That it would be a great way of addressing this problem of supply versus demand.
So Eric Greening put a question in the chat. Eric, do you want me to read it, or do you want to just go ahead and ask your question?
Well, yeah, I guess I don't know who else is reading the chat, but yes, just sort of a follow-up to Marty Brown's question. The seismic blasting was blocked by the California Coastal Commission because it violated the Coastal Act. Massive death of sea life would have been caused. And so it appears that AB 205 and its Senate counterparts sideline the Coastal Commission and all other state bodies and local governments, except for the Department of Water Resources, which doesn't have expertise in these matters. And so my question is, can these laws be legally challenged for violating the Coastal Act, the Bagley-Keene Act, the California Environmental Quality Act, and so on? They seem to amount to essentially a coup, a complete disruption of orderly government process that are pretty foundational to our state and that we count on to protect our safety. I mean, the county would have to, for example, come up with health and safety findings for a project like this. If the county is sidelined, I don't think the Department of Water Resources has the expertise to do it. So are these laws ripe for a legal challenge? And if so, who should put it out?
So, yeah, I think, Eric, I don't know if you can, I see you've unmuted yourself, but I do know that a couple organizations, and we've been talking to some lawmakers, that there needs to be some clarity about about AB 205, because the language seems to indicate that all of the, it overrides local control, and the control commissions have the oversight they have regarding these fossil fuel plants, the four that they want to keep running in Diablo, although there's no mention of Diablo, but it's clear that it's in the mix. So Ralph, go ahead. Or Eric. Yes.
Go ahead, Ralph.
Well, I'll dispute the premise. I don't think Diablo Canyon, we first of all did oppose those provisions because of the excessive overrides of environmental protection in some instances, but we are confident that Diablo Canyon is not covered by those overrides and those waivers. And that is a position also that the governor himself took in his signing statement, where he said that nothing in those bills affects life extensions for plants with expiring permits. So we'll hold him to his word.
Okay.
As far as, the California legislature can amend statutes if it wants to, but in this case, we're confident that they did not, at least as regards Diablo Canyon.
And the only thing I'll add on Ralph's point is that to keep Diablo Canyon open, to follow through on Governor Newsom's wishes, would require such an extraordinary effort by the state legislature to amend, repeal, define carve-outs in many of the bedrock laws, environmental laws in California, that it would be a fairly significant usurpation of power for one company to one reactor that they said didn't need to be operated past 2025. And so that is, it's not impossible. The governor is, going to take another swipe at trying to extend Diablo Canyon, we believe. But those are the types of extraordinary actions that are going to that the legislature is going to have to sign off on if they want to move, if they want to keep Diablo Canyon in operation.
You mean otherwise, there would have to be a bill, right? Some legislation passed by, I guess, the end of August, to keep the plant, to keep the plant running past 2025. Is that correct? I mean, that's what we heard, is that he's coming up, he's putting a bill together to do that, to override legislation.
I don't know what the time frame is, but it's PG&E is currently in the mode of decommissioning the reactors.
Yeah.
It's going to take an extraordinary effort to keep those reactors operating, now that they're on a pathway for shutdown. And my sense is that if this is going to happen, it has to happen sooner rather than later, because frankly, the time frame for PG&E to change course is they don't have that much more time to kind of change direction if that's kind of where the political policy debate is at. And so yes, time is of the essence for the governor to get his wishes to keep Diablo Canyon in operation. And and it will take an extraordinary amount of effort to do that.
I don't think the legislation normally can be introduced in August. If it's going to be acted on by August, it needs to be introduced in January, unless an emergency or special session is called. So I think it goes even beyond that. But I do want to ask whether a signing statement has the force of law.
It is a factor that's taken into account when evaluating an otherwise ambiguous statute. It's helpful. It's not dispositive. In this case, the reason I think we win is that the statute itself makes no mention of Diablo Canyon, makes no mention of any measure, any change in the environmental requirements applicable to existing power plants with expiring permits. It's not in the statute.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Nick?
Yeah, if you could just paint out more details on what actually is involved in keeping, what are all the things that are involved that are no simple matter by extending the life of the operations by 3, 5, 10 years, whatever it is. What all is entailed that makes it so difficult?
Erich, you want to take that?
Who wants to take that? Erich?
Yeah, I guess I'm not going to kind of publicly kind of list all of the issues that need to be resolved from a regulatory perspective to keep reactor going, as to not kind of provide a blueprint of like kind of activities that the legislature needs to overdo. So I appreciate the question. Many of us are working on kind of all the statutory limitations and all the permits that need to go through. But I'm not going to list those here just because of the public nature of the conversation.
Thank you. And I see Ramana has his hand raised, and he is a welcome guest. If you could introduce yourself and then go ahead.
My
and
name
ask
is Ramana. I'm a professor at the University of British Columbia, and I've been looking at what's happening in Diablo for the last couple of years. And in general, I focus on nuclear energy and especially small modular reactors. With respect to, sorry, I'm turning off my camera because my connection is bad. I don't want to slow down the thing for other people. According to the numbers, some of the documents which are put in the chat from the California ISO, there's a huge amount of renewables and energy storage capacity in the queue that has to be sort of cleared by ISO. And I mean, my expectation would be a substantial fraction of this will come online over the next few years. So, this is much more than Diablo Canyon can provide. So I'm wondering why there is this concern about shortfalls after 2024-25. And is there someone with insight into what's happening at CAISO?
It's a pleasure to welcome a distinguished visitor with whom I've talked before. The short answer, I think, is that what the governor's office is worried about are supply chain issues, number one, and number two, transmission constraints that, in their view, create some uncertainty about how much renewable capacity can come online and when. I think from my perspective, from that of many on this call, those are problems worth directing the entire attention of government to solving. You're right, there's plenty of capacity. There are constraints now on the ability to get it online and the ability to interconnect it. Those are problems we've overcome in the past. We've got a bigger renewable energy inventory right now than anyone would have thought possible a decade ago. So we should be all in to solve those problems. We should not be getting distracted. And this is the one thing I can say without going, Eric's right, there's no point in going through a blueprint of all of the challenges associated with Diablo Canyon, but it is at minimum a huge management struggle, which would take the best minds in government and in the utility sector to even attempt to overcome. And we need all of those folks and all of that talent directed at the technologies of the 21st century, not the mid-20th, which is another reason, I think, for the urgent hope of everyone here that we can get back focused on what matters as quickly as possible. And again, PG&E has not been pushing to do this. The impetus is not coming from the utility. The impetus is coming from elsewhere, a lot of it from an organized campaign, and the rebuttal on the merits here is the best response to it.
The only thing I'll add is that Governor Newsom has higher aspirations, and he has seen the California energy crisis take down previous governors, Gray Davis being one, through recall. And so I think, there is a irrational political fear, a lack of confidence in what Ralph just mentioned. Like, if we were to invest the whole of government of California into dealing with the supply chain issues, if they are legit, we could do that. And then I will also say that, and Ralph has alluded to this, and I think Jane has as well, that there is outside nuclear proponents that see an orderly transition of a reactor shutting down in the midst of this conversation about what we do with climate change as a deep existential threat to, as I will quote a dear friend of mine, Dave Freeman, the religion of nuclear power. And so those are kind of the political factors that I see kind of in this conversation as well.
And I'd like to add, along with that, for the reporters, that the MIT Stanford study, so-called, was not published by MIT, nor was it published by Stanford, nor was it published by both. It was published by an outside. It had the contributors to the study were people who work at MIT and Stanford. But if you look at the actual study, there's a disclaimer on the first page saying this is not an official document of either MIT or Stanford. This is a propaganda document that was created by the pro-nukes to keep Diablo Canyon open. And exactly what Erich just said holds true here. This has been taken by them as a symbol of the viability of nuclear power in the United States. And so they're willing to fight as hard as they can to keep this particular plant open, because it always has been a symbolic struggle about nuclear power ever since before it started. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really important to keep disinformation at bay, right? So let's look at the landscape of what's really happening. And that's why I really appreciate all of you attending. And I know Mothers for Peace is thrilled that we were able to do this with such smart, informed, on the money people. So if there are other questions, we're almost at time. We have a couple minutes left. I don't see any other questions or anyone else wants to make a comment, a final comment. That would be awesome. I do believe that tonight should be an interesting, informative meeting as to sort of answering that question of what needs to be done in order to continue on the path to decommissioning, right? I think there's going to be information about that. We could put the link to the event in the chat if anyone has it handy, or I can do that. Jill, do you have that handy? Let's see. And it is on Zoom, so you don't have to be in San Luis Obispo. And if we wait 1 second, I think Jill's going to put it in the chat, or maybe you all have it. So
There
I
is
think
an option, but it's also on Zoom, but it can also be attended physically, is my understanding.
yes, you can go physically if you're in the area, or you can attend at Zoom. It's at 6 p.m.
I'd like to make a concluding wrap-up comment. On behalf of Mothers for Peace, we so appreciate the support of the experts that have participated in this press conference and of other allied organizations. We are truly fortunate that our common cause has brought together incredible attorneys and other citizen activist groups from all over the nation, because Mothers for Peace, we have the special status that we're here. Diablo's in our backyard. And that's why we felt called to oppose it starting in 1973. But we couldn't have made any headway without the support and the added voices, the power, and the knowledge base. So thank you so much to everybody, including Sam, who had to leave. His presentation on the big picture of the seismic issues was terrific. So anyway, thanks to everybody for being allies of Mothers for Peace. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your time in your busy days, and see you all soon. Thank you so much.